We're gonna see how long Paolo hangs around for this one, because sometimes he likes to book it. Welcome to a room that is not, I don't know, the kitchen or a bathroom or the laundry room. Welcome to a room that is cozy and invites interactions like this with cats. The parlor at the estate was originally going to be a dining room, a formal dining room, and there's no reason for me to have a formal dining room because I surprisingly don't entertain formally very often. But in my mind, that's what it was going to be. I decided to make it a parlor. In the listing photos, there was a pretty blank space for a room. It was kind of odd that the doorway leading into the front living room did not have trim on it, considering there was trim going into the room behind me, which is the study, and then trim going into the kitchen. All the windows had their original trim on them, and it appeared all of the baseboards were original as well. Other things that struck me as odd in the room were the weird built-in shelving unit over on the side, which clearly was not original to the house at all. And then why they would choose the massive baseboard heater that they did, considering the opening, once we took it all apart, the opening for that baseboard heater was a foot wide. The other thing was, carpet. You can see in this photo here, the carpet was different in here as it was leading into the living room. Carpet was also different in here than what was in the study behind me. The shelf on the wall there in the corner on the right, that was where you can kind of see discolored on the baseboard still too. On the right, that was where the Franklin stove had been, which if you recall from the walkthrough of the house, the Franklin stove is what was responsible for the attic catching on fire and subsequently the entire second floor of the house. There he goes. We've lost our mascot, everybody. And finally, the neat feature of the room, or the feature that really directed me on what direction I wanted to go with the design, is the bowed out wall there. That's not the right way to describe it, but the wall that angles outward, and it's just kind of a, I don't know, there's nothing else on the house like it. I am covered in cat hair now. It's the story of my life. Before we get into demo, let's talk about the design of the room. This was the room where, when I looked at the house, the very first, even from the listing photos, but when I looked at the house, I thought, I'm gonna paint the ceiling black. I had wanted to paint a ceiling black for years at that point and just didn't have the right area to do it because the ceilings were always a little bit lower in my houses, especially at the ranch. The ceiling was way too low and it was popcorned, so the hell with that. But at the manor, because I was painting walls black, and at the time, considering that was 2018, I was like, ooh, you're a rebel. This is way out of the box. And now I feel like it's just a thing people do. For me, it was a big step, just like the ceiling was going to be a big step. I just had it in my mind, I'm painting the ceiling black. Because in the house I'm using tricorn black as my accent, I didn't want to use tricorn as the ceiling color. We're gonna open up our friend Miro here, where I did all my storyboarding essentially. At the top, you might think in terms of paint, black paint is black paint, and you're not wrong, but when you start comparing paint colors to each other, especially on a swatch deck, you notice that different black paints pull different colors. I was interested in caviar. So caviar has a little bit of a purple undertone. I can't really see it. I don't see it, let me clarify. So the ceiling was going to be caviar. The upper third of the walls, caviar as well. And then this lower portion, creamy, and then egret white for the trim. Because of the way that the walls go outward for the windows, it made me think of bees and honeycombs. I just thought, okay, if you're doing black in a space and brass is your accent color, that's essentially yellow and black. Bees are yellow and black. How can you incorporate that? What else can you do? So with the shape of the walls making me think of honeycombs, I let that direct me. This was the inspiration. That picture on the left is really almost exactly what I did with I was going to do the upper portion black, lower white, and then add a rail around the room as the separator. I think I found the ceiling medallion on Wayfair, and if it's still there, I'll link it below. And it was technically a flower. I think it was a lily. Even if it's a lily, it's geometric, and geometrically, that's a honeycomb. And then also from Wayfair was this chandelier, which I thought, hey, that is also a honeycomb shape and it's brass, so that's going to work perfectly for the space. With those pieces, I was really like, you're off to the races now. So then I was just searching bees. I found these great bee prints. There were the bee drapery holdbacks that I was going to be doing, and those came from Anthropology, and if they're still available, I'll link them below as well. And then the other big component for this room was going to be the piano. I was going to wait to talk about it until we get into the living room, but the piano was always going to exist in this room. There was not a ton of demo that was going to be going into this room. As any person that buys an old house with the intent of refinishing those floors, your every hope is that the floors are in good condition underneath. They might still have stain and they might be kind of scuffed up and whatever, but your hope is that they're going to be in good condition. And when we tested the flooring, it was up in the front living room and it was like, yes, this is good. It's got old varnish on it. We can refinish this. I can refinish this. So we pulled the carpet up, or rather, credit where credit is due. I want to say my parents tore up probably 90% of the carpet in the house. They pulled it up, they cut it into strips. They were working machines at this because it was something that they could do while I was working my 9-to-5 job. They could come here and work on the carpet because it was something that didn't require approval, or I don't say that in a like, I was the project manager and I'm watching you guys. I mean that in a, they didn't have to ask what the plan was behind things, or, okay, here's a quick project that we're going to do. What's next? It was, well, the carpet has to come out. That is something that's going to take several days. We can do that, and we don't need to ask for direction on what he wants done with stuff. Just get it all out. This is, Jesus fuck. This is how the floor looked in the parlor. I wasn't panicked about it. I wasn't like shitting the bed because of what this looked like. There's a lot going on in this. In this picture alone, there is shellac on the floor. There's stain. There are areas that they tried to maybe take the stain off. That white stuff is paint from when the fire had happened and they refinished areas. They just went ballistic on painting and clearly spilled it in the middle of the room, and there's weird marked off areas where they had taped off or covered the baseboards and stuff. It was a mess. And in this picture, in the back corner, you can see where that angle is. Again, that is where the Franklin stove had been. So there had been some sort of a platform attached to the ground there because you could still see all of the nail holes from what was there. This other angle, that open space was covered with a piece of plywood. That is where the big floor register was. I think this was all of the downstairs carpet in this photo because it was just getting staged in here until the dumpster had arrived. But it was just it was a mess. It was a mess. You could see the windows also had those old vinyl roller shades, which I would be taking those out. With the carpet gone, you can see how much real estate there was for flooring. And I will say, despite the condition that the floors were in from a surface level, they were in great condition otherwise. Yes, there were staples all over them. There were nails everywhere. There was all kinds of crap. They were in good shape. This is from the tack strips for carpet, which I will freely say that tack strips are the worst thing to remove of the entire carpet removal process. It is taking those damn things up because they are so secured to the ground. They are a nightmare. While we're on this picture, I will no longer justify my decision to paint the trim. I don't care if you don't like that. I don't care. But look at the condition of the baseboards. They were trashed. They were super dried out, marked up, scuffed, dented, all the things. You could argue like, well, those can be refinished. They could. I wasn't going to do it. If that's the hill you want to die on, you can go right on climbing. This, though, is the demo that happened. The doorway into the living room was weirdly low. It was lower than the doors behind me, than any other opening. It was lower. I would eventually find out that this doorway had not been there originally. That was a solid wall. The nook that you can see there, the little shelving nook thing, that had been pocket doors at some point in time. When they added this opening, which was probably in the 60s, they just did it, but I am tall. I don't like that look, and I wanted everything to feel much more grand, more historically accurate, I guess. I mean, it was going to be a play on historical accuracy. Nothing I do is by the book to like, well, this is what would happen in Victorian times. I just wanted it higher. So let's move into construction. Because there wasn't a ton of demo, there wasn't a ton of stuff to rebuild. So really a lot of it was that little nook. It came down very low, not insanely low, but it came down lower than it is now. Because I was going to be keeping that piano, I wanted the piano to go in that corner. It was going to drop like 8 inches below the back of the piano, and I just thought that's going to look dumb. I'm going to build a shelf in it, finish that off, and match it to the wall and do a new built-in without shelving because I had a plan. This is when I started adding 2x4s to it to create the base that was going to go in there. This is with sheetrock on top of the 2x4s, so sealing in for the wall, and then more plaster on it. That was how it was going to be for a moment because I needed to do the texturing on the walls. The other thing that was going on, because all of this was happening as kitchen work was going on, you know, everything was torn up and destroyed. I'll pull up a zoomed in shot of it. When I bought the house, there were 2 thermostats. Both of them were right here on the wall next to me. One of them was very, very old, and it had a very helpful post-it note on it that said, "Do not use, not connected." So why is it there? The other one was connected and did work, but it was from maybe the early 90s. So me, I'm a modern gal. I wanted to upgrade it. And because the wall on the kitchen side was completely torn open, I thought, all right, well, the wiring for these is super old, and I think it had maybe like 3 wires, so that's not gonna support a modern thermostat. I don't know what they call it, and I'm just going off the top of my head. It's like you need a common wire, I think, that supplies the power to it essentially. From the last house, I had a whole spool of the wire that you would run from a furnace to a thermostat. So I was like, oh, I've already got this stuff, I'll just run a new wire. I know other people that have the same thermostat and it works great for them. Touchscreen on mine is not good, so I usually end up programming it from my phone because the touchscreen doesn't pick up my finger. But I was super excited because when I connected it and ran the new wire and connected that all to the furnace, I did it right the first time, which, if you'll recall from the ranch, I broke the furnace when I ran it because I shorted stuff out. Had to have someone come out and fix it for me. So I was really excited that I did this right. This window is very cool because it is original to the house. Cross grid that you see in it, that's actually the storm window that's original to the house as well. The window itself on the inside is super thick glass, and it is beveled glass all around the edges, which is really neat. It is wavy glass. It's not the most energy efficient window, but I'm not going to do anything about that. You'll see what I did. This is getting ready for applying the texture to the walls. So my mom was kind enough to take plastic sheeting that we had and cover up the windows just so that I didn't have to be super careful with how I was spraying the stuff. This is after spraying everything. Now you will see that it's on the woodwork. The great thing about spraying plaster texture is that if you just get a wet washcloth, you can wipe it off of any surface that it landed on. That was great. So don't worry about that because it did get cleaned off of there. I don't know why you would be worried, but if you are. That red laser was so that I could determine where the rail was going to go around the room to create the difference in colors. It was very tricky because this room right now, we are at an angle. I am angled back to the house because everything dips to this corner back here. What was tricky about it was I tried going around the room with a level first, and I couldn't figure out why. It ended up making the room look angled. There was something off about the whole thing. I did the laser level. I think it's even up to this doorway, and then it starts angling upward. And I'll tell you why. Because I learned from the laundry room about priming. It's a lot cheaper to buy tinted primer for like $15 a gallon than wasting expensive Sherwin-Williams paint. I have gone through and I have primed everything with my sprayer. I have a Wagner sprayer, and I'll drop the link for that below. I got the gray on everything. It was helping me to kind of visualize what this was eventually going to look like with the black on it. From that, we move on to painting. It's probably hard to tell in this picture. You know, lighting does a lot, but these are the 6 shades of black paint that I was considering from Sherwin-Williams. Tricorn on the upper right, that is, as I said, the trim accent color that I've got throughout the house. Bottom middle is Black Magic, which I used at the Manor, and then I used leftover paint from that at the ranch, and I just thought, you need to stop using Black Magic, get a different color. So I went with Caviar in the top left. I started by cutting in the corners of the ceiling, and here is the photo where you can see why things looked off, and it's because the entire ceiling is angled. Similar with the issues that I had in the kitchen where I took all those shims down and whatever, then put the new sheetrock up and the ceiling ended up being angled. It's angled in almost every room. It's super frustrating because if you want to do something like crown molding, it's going to be a nightmare to do it because you're not just cutting angles for corners, but you're cutting because it's at an angle going into a different angle, and it's a whole thing. I started painting the black, and I will tell you, I am someone that has a hard time trusting the process most of the time, and I was not trusting the process here because it's painting black on a ceiling is just not something I grew up believing I was ever going to be allowed to do because it's such a big no, you don't do that. I'd seen it in pictures, I'd seen it in my inspiration picture, and I was going to do it. So I started painting it. It didn't help that there was really no lighting in the house, so there was no way of knowing what this was going to look like with light on it. There was just the light coming in from the windows. As it dried and I started painting down to the walls, I started becoming obsessed with it. It's nowhere near done, but it's looking cool, and it's weirdly, I don't really know the word for it. It was just, there was something special about how it felt in here. I mentioned this regarding the laundry room, whether you're color drenching or doing what I did in here where the ceiling meets part of the wall in that color, the corners disappear. You don't really know where the ceiling ends and the wall begins, which is really neat. And then here I started putting the color creamy on the walls. I chose a yellowy white because I didn't want the room to be a literal translation of bees. I didn't want yellow on the walls. It's been fine, but as with the kitchen, which had been white originally, I just don't want this room to be white anymore. I have no idea what color I would rather the white be, and I have no idea if that means the trim is going to change as well. Here you can see it was definitely a very buttery white color, and another example of it being painted around the thermostat, so you can see, against white, that was what it looked like. In an order I shouldn't have worked in, I painted everything before I took care of the floors. To refinish the flooring, I rented a big belt sander from Ace Hardware. There's an Ace not far from here that has the best customer. They're pretty good in general, I think, with customer service. There's one that direction that's just shit with customer service, but the one that way, maybe half a mile further, they're wonderful, and you can rent all sorts of tools from them, which I've never done before. I rented this big belt sander from them. I had no idea what the hell I was doing. They told me everything I needed to know, walked me through what kind of sandpapers to use, all that. I started the process in the study and it went great. Then I moved on to the living room and it was less great, but okay. By the time I got in here, it was really bad. This picture kind of shows you why. I'm sure some of you know this already. I had no idea about this. Shellac is, you can still do shellac on things. It's a type of varnish or polyurethane-esque thing that they would use on floors back in the day. The problem with shellac is, and I don't know if this is because it's got wax in it or what the deal is, and don't quote me because I'm really not a flooring expert. Long story short, when you try to sand it off with a belt sander, the friction generates heat, which melts the shellac, which then melts it to your belt sander. And you end up with sandpaper like this that leaves burnt streaks of shit across the floor. You can get that off. It's not a problem. It's like melted, tarry wax crap. I don't know how much time I spent in here that day, but what I do know is I rented the belt sander for 24 hours and exhausted the rest of my supply of sandpaper in this room, ultimately creating a pathway from the living room to the kitchen and in between to the study. And then I had to return it because I was like, I'm not going to be able to get through this. And the sandpaper is not cheap. It's I don't remember how much it was, but I want to say it was like $10 a piece, something like that. We looked it up, and to remove the shellac or varnish, whatever the hell you want to call it, you can use denatured alcohol to do so. This sounded like a task for Denny Parker. This sounded like a task for my mom. And she spent a couple days with a mask on a piece of styrofoam to save her knees, because that's what she used for removing all the nails of the floor too. And she very meticulously went through this room. It was spreading the alcohol, which was, don't light a match because it's super flammable. Spreading the alcohol, waiting a second, and then scraping the stuff off, wiping it into this tub, and then spreading more and scraping and spreading more and scraping. And she did such a great job, but she got through it. And then I rented the belt sander again and got the floors looking like this. So you can see, it doesn't matter how many little nail holes you have in your floor, or if there are areas where the floor needs to be spliced in, like my dad did in here, splicing in new maple flooring where that register had been. Once it's all sanded down, it is beautiful. Another thing to note is that all of the original floors in the house are maple. On downstairs, they're maple. And maple is notoriously difficult to stain and have it look consistent, because maple wood, there's a lot of variation in what the grain looks like. And you can, if you apply a medium colored stain, let's say, to it, you'll have some boards that look like tiger striping and some that are very mottled and some that are perfectly solid. I didn't want to attach myself to a color, so I just applied a water-based polyurethane to the floors. The downside to a water-based polyurethane is that it is not as durable as oil-based. You do have to apply, I think I did 4 layers of polyurethane in here, and it's not going to last as long as oil before you have to kind of do a light sand on the whole thing and apply another layer of it. You have years before that. The reason I chose water over oil is because oil-based polyurethane will start to yellow over time, and I absolutely did not want my floors to turn golden or have an amber hue to them. I wanted them just to be the clean wood. So this was after a full day of, you'd apply it, you had to wait 3 or 4 hours, and then I'd go scooting across it in my socks and do more. And I had this giant floor squeegee to do it with. Look at how beautiful they they still look like this. The floor just turned out gorgeous, and compared to the carpet that had been in here, I could not have been happier with how it turned out. With the floors done, it was time to start working on some details. I feel like the center of the house is the heart of the house. I'll refer to the bathroom off of the study as the heart of the house bathroom, which is why its theme is hearts. But I feel like these rooms need to have a stronger theme than the rest of the house, perhaps. What helped with my theming was that when we were working on the house, inexplicably, there are a lot of bumblebees, and they were in the basement. It was only that first spring. I didn't see any last year in the house, but we would collect them in little, empty boxes from screws, and we'd take them outside. But this is a picture between the storm window and the giant window, because it wasn't sealed properly. There were a lot of holes around the edges of it, but there was a bumblebee in there, and I just thought, well, that's an omen for what this room is going to look like. I ordered the bee drapery pullbacks from Anthropologie. It was one of the things where I've tried to be very budget conscious for a lot of decor items and sourcing them from not real expensive places. These were one of the pricier things that I purchased, and they might have been, well, at the time, they might have been like $60. I don't know if they're more now or less. I was very happy with them, got those installed. To go with the black ceiling in here and kind of merge with that creamy color, I wanted dark gray velvet curtains. Now the whole house has velvet curtains in it. At some point in time, I'll start switching those out for different materials. For now, I like how they look. They were not expensive, so I got them. But with the bees, I wasn't going to buy 2 full sets because they were too expensive. So after these guys had been installed, I got flowers. Bees, flowers, they go together. They're harmonious, if you will. The artwork that I was going to be adding as well incorporated flowers, specifically peonies, which these holdbacks are peonies. But it was coming together great. And then the chandelier arrived. So the chandelier came at the same time as the ceiling medallion. What I did was painted the whole medallion, drilled a huge hole through the middle of it because it was solid. And the medallion itself is not hollow. It is PVC. It is heavy, so it's just a giant thick piece of plastic. So I got that installed, caulked around it, painted, all that, and then I installed the chandelier. I'm still very happy with it. It does not look like this anymore, which we'll get to. With all that installed, we move on to trim. This doorway into the living room is now the exact same height as the doorway leading into the kitchen, which we had also modified to be taller and a little bit wider. But for each doorway, there was no trim in the house that was original that was that height. So that meant all new trim. Something I did out of order that I should have done it differently. I assumed where the new trim would land. I assumed the width of it, and then based on that width, I moved on to adding the railing. I should have installed the door frames first before adding the railing around the room, because the railing came up short in several areas and I didn't have the resources at the time to purchase more of the railing, so I had to fill it with caulk, which just looks like doo-doo. That's how we learn. So I started adding the railing to split the black from the creamy. It went well. It did its job. It was a clean line around the room, and it was going to be getting painted the regular trim color of the house, which is that egret white. When that was up, I moved on to painting the window here. So this is with the window all taped off. And as I was doing that, I was also going to be repainting all of the other windows in the house. Now, these windows are from 1983. They are Anderson windows, so they were good quality. They're not great anymore just because they're 40 years old. They can all lead out and be removed from the windows. I took them out, recalked where necessary because some of the weather stripping along the glass was shot, and then painted all that tricorn black, and then painted the big window tricorn black as well. Moved on to the nook in the corner where it had been sheetrock on the back before. I put a very thin piece of MDF just so that it was a solid, smooth surface, and then added all of the trim work. So if you recall, that had just been a regular drywall box in the wall with no trim. I added all the trim work, wood all along the inside of it as well to make it look like more of a built-in. And then this is where I was going to be putting my prints for the bees and then a couple other bugs. You know, there's like a butterfly in there and there's a dragonfly as well. But then there's a giant peony. I keep saying peony, and if it's not a peony, I feel like a real total jackass. I wanted that just to be the little moment, the more obvious lean to the theme of the room being bees. Now, I can be a real bitch about letting people help me with stuff. Initially with the house, I was fine with the demolition help because I didn't want to do it all myself. I don't really like demolition. I know everyone's like, it's the best thing in the world. It's not for me. The novelty wears off pretty quick, especially in a project as big as this was. So one of my very oldest friends, Jill, I've known Jill since we were 13. She lives a couple hours north and offered to help where I needed it. When it comes to finishing work and finishing details, I can be a real bitch about wanting to do it myself and only me, so that everything you see, I can say, oh, I did that myself. Gotten a little better about that, but I'm not great about it. But Jill offered to come and help because I had my parents' anniversary party coming up and I was running out of time. I said, yes, come on down. If you want to start priming all of the baseboards and trim in here, that would help me a ton because it'll save me time, because priming old woodwork is very necessary, as I learned. Otherwise, you're going to waste a ton of expensive paint not priming it. This is with the egret white on after the priming had been done, and the transformation of that wall was just amazing. While I'm happy with my drapes, you know, I have no issue with my drapes. I do partly wish I didn't have them, just so that I could view that whole expanse of windows there, because to me it felt like it was a shop. It felt like it was a Williams-Sonoma store. I don't know why I feel that way, but that's how it felt. So I loved it. But it was so clean and crisp, and you know, for this room and how dry the woodwork had looked and all that, it was just holy shit. It's still pristine. I love this room. I love it. Whatever. I'm getting off topic here. This is how the nook turned out. I painted the back of it black to match the tricorn black that's elsewhere. And then we've got the piano in front of it. So we'll make a real quick detour and talk about the piano. So the piano was left behind by the former owners. Initially, when I came into the house the day I bought it, I was like, oh, the piano's here still. I don't play. I don't really want it, but it is neat looking. I want to be honorable to the past. I decided, okay, I'll keep it. I'll incorporate it into the design of the parlor. It was very pretty. It was missing some screws that held things down. Over time, I started realizing it was not a great piano. Not only was it horribly out of tune, but to get it tuned was going to be several sessions. It's a lot of money. I don't have that money, and I don't play the piano, so why would I spend that money? When I'd walk through the house, the piano rattled. It scratched the hell out of the floor after it had been finished from moving it into place, because it was heavier than hell, and I'm sure a lot of you who have Ever tried moving a piano? No, that is heavier than hell. Ultimately, I tried listing it on Craigslist. I listed it on the Nextdoor app. No bites, because no one wants an old piano that's out of tune, because people know how much it's going to cost to fix it and to transport the damn thing. Because again, it weighs. The thing had to have weighed like 600 pounds. By winter, I dragged it out to the front porch, the enclosed porch, and had it out there. By spring, when the daughter of the former owners came to visit, she saw that it was out there and she was like, "Oh, you still have this?" And I was like, "Yeah, I tried getting rid of it, sorry." And she's like, "Oh, no. My mom never played it. We've had that thing since the 60s and no one ever played it. Someone every now and then at Christmas would play it, but like, we didn't want it." And I thought, jerks. Like, you should have gotten rid of it then. Like, you left it for me to deal with. And then I started looking into the story of the piano, like what the brand, the model number. Is this a valuable piece? It wasn't valuable. It wasn't expensive at the time. It's worth nothing. And then I started seeing, okay, a lot of this is plastic. None of these aren't ivory keys. This isn't a nice thing. At that point, I think it had been on Craigslist for like 5 or 6 months, the Nextdoor app, for the same amount of time, for free. I'll help you get it into your vehicle or whatever. No bites. So I started dismantling the whole thing, and I burned it. I threw away what was plastic and not burnable, and I burned the rest. And then I had the giant harp for the thing, which hung out in the backyard for a few weeks until we had bulk pickup here. And then I put it down by the curb, and metal scrappers came and took that within half an hour of me putting it down there. And that's the story of the piano, and I'm not going to apologize for it. So if you have negative thoughts on that, keep them to yourself, because I don't care. So after that, we're going to go back to the trim. So the doorways leading into the living room and the kitchen, there was no trim left in the house that would match the height. So that meant new trim. A lot of doorways in old houses have plinth blocks, which is this piece at the bottom. It's like just a decorative piece, but it's a little bit different from the rest of the trim. The kitchen still had all of its original plinth blocks, and I think there's one doorway where we had to make them. The stairwell that used to run from the back room upstairs to the outside, since that was being taken out, all of the steps of those stairs we cut down and rounded off the top edge and used those as the plinth blocks. So in this photo, those blue blocks, that's because the stairs were painted blue. So I did that and then painted it. And I did on the other side and then painted it. I remember my sister coming over the first time after I'd finished all of this. I don't remember exactly how she phrased it, but it was like, "Well, these look like they're original to the house." And I just thought that was the best compliment, because the whole mission of this house had been to bring the character back and make it look historical again, even if it wasn't. That is pretty much what we've got for the parlor. After the anniversary party, which this room was, set up with the giant folding table still, and all the pictures of my parents over the years and the family were here, and all the, it was their golden anniversary, so it was all gold balloons and all that stuff. Not long after that did I decide this was not going to be a dining room, it was going to be a sitting area, a parlor. This sofa here, which is a sleeper sofa, it had been in the study. I thought I was just going to sell it, and then thought, well, you might as well put it in here. So I did, and I moved some chairs down here that were gray velvet, and they matched the drapes. Really, this room just became like a cozy middle area. The chandelier, when I said that it doesn't look that way anymore, it's because I bought it to go over a table. It was a little low to walk under, but that was fine because it was going to be on over a table. With no table in here, I hit my head on it a couple times. It might have been at like 6'2" off the ground. So I cracked my head a few times and learned when I walked underneath it to just, dip. But then other people would hit their heads. And my friend Andrew was visiting from Maine over Christmas, and he whacked his head really good on it. So I bought some hooks, took that bottom tier, and just moved it up. So it looks like this now, and that is how much clearance I have underneath the chandelier, so I can walk underneath with no fear of hitting my head. So this room, it has gone through many iterations. This sofa has been in, initially it was right here, and then it was against the windows there, and then for Christmas you all saw that it was over on that corner. Now it is in this corner. I will probably not keep this sofa. The ultimate plan would be to get 4 or 5 chairs in this room, because eventually what I would like to do is have a fireplace back here in the corner, not a wood burning one, just an electric insert, but building a whole mantle and the whole thing to have a fireplace where there had once been one. We'll see. It's an evolving room. It's a tricky room. It's evolving. It's constantly evolving in here. I haven't decided what phase 2 is going to be. My mind is constantly running on this room and how I want to utilize the space. One final thing that I did in this room that you maybe noticed in the bathroom last week, but there is a diamond lattice grid on the windows now, on the bottom panels. Those have been applied to almost all of the windows in the house because there are looky-loos in the neighborhood. I don't want to have the drapes closed all the time because it gets depressing because it's dark. This still lets light in. It keeps things private if you're just sitting in this room, apart from the giant window. You know, I'm not going to cover that whole thing up. If you see it and you're wondering why I have that, that's why. It's for privacy. And because I use this bathroom a lot because it's my favorite bathroom in the house, and I walk around in certain states of dress sometimes. So that being said, we're going to wrap this up with the before and afters and the final look so you can see what it really looks like now compared to what it did at the time. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any questions or comments on anything that you saw in the video today, please feel free to drop them in the comments below. You can also reach out to me on Instagram at restoring_Sean, or find me on my website at restoringsean.com. That way, if you want me to work for you or do things with you, I can do that even if you live remotely. So give it a look. Next week, we are going to be moving right back there into the study. Keep this little project rolling along. That video is probably going to be a little bit shorter. So until then, take care. Thank you so much, and I will see you soon.